Let us continue with the second art period, and that is the ancient Egyptian period. Egypt, which is located in northeast Africa, was the home of one of the most powerful and longest-lasting civilizations of the ancient world. In the Neolithic period, before about 7000 BC, farming communities had settled along the banks of the Nile River. They used stone tools and made ivory and bone objects and pottery products. Until its unification around 3100 BC, ancient Egypt had been divided into Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. Egypt was defined by its most important geographical feature, and that is the Nile River, the world's longest river. Because annual floods kept the land fertile, Egypt was called the gift of the Nile. The first example of an art piece under the ancient Egyptian period are pyramids. Pyramids are the most monumental architectural expression of an Egyptian pharaoh's power. It also serves as their burial place and zone of passage into the afterlife. These were originally made of mud brick and were faced with cut stones. Now, the shape of the Egyptian pyramids is thought to represent the primordial mount from which the Egyptians believed that the earth was created. The shape of a pyramid is also thought to be representative of the descending rays of the sun, and most pyramids were faced with polished, highly reflective white limestone in order to give them a brilliant appearance when viewed from a distance. Now, the Egyptians believed that the dark area of the night sky around which the stars appeared to revolve was the physical gateway into the heavens. One of the narrow shafts that extend from the main burial chamber of the pyramid through the entire body of the Great Pyramid points directly towards the center of this part of the sky. This suggests that the pyramid may have been designed to serve as a means to magically launch the deceased pharaoh's soul directly into the abode of the gods. Now, all Egyptian pyramids were built on the west bank of the Nile, which, as the site of the setting sun, was associated with the realm of the dead in Egyptian mythology. Our next example of an art piece under the ancient Egyptian period is the bust of Nefertiti. The Nefertiti bust was found on December 6, 1912 at Amarna by the German Oriental Company, led by the German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt. Now, owing to the work, the Nefertiti bust has become one of the most famous women of the ancient world, and she became an icon of feminine beauty. Even her name, Nefertiti, means the beautiful one has come forth. Nefertiti was not only a queen consort of Egypt, she also became a queen in her own right. The last example of one of the contributions of the ancient Egyptians when it comes to art are beauty and cosmetics. It is also one of the longest lasting contributions of the ancient Egyptians when it comes to art. Now, the ancient Egyptians believe or regard beauty as a sign of holiness. They regard it as an integral part of their daily lives. Even traders trade makeup often, especially in the upper classes. In tombs, cosmetic palettes were also found buried with the deceased as grave goods, which further emphasized the idea that cosmetics were not only used for aesthetic purposes, but rather for magical and religious purposes. Now, there are two main forms of eye makeup that they use. First one, it's a green eye paint, which they use for their eyeshadow. And the second one, you have a black kohl, which they use for their eyeliners. Now, the green pigment was made from a substance called malachite, which is a copper carbonate pigment, while the black kohl was made from a substance called galena, which is a dark gray ore. Crushed up charcoal was also used in this process. Now, the ancient Egyptians were not entirely misguided in believing that kohl would prevent eye infections because there is a scientific evidence for it. It actually did prevent an ocular infection that was caused by the flooding of the Nile. Now, the lead-based substance in the kohl promoted the production of nitric oxide in their skin, which helped strengthen their immune system against diseases. The soot in the kohl helped in reducing the damaging effects of sun glare on their eyes. Let us continue with the third period in Western art. We have the Greek art. Now, when it comes to style, let us differentiate Egyptian art and Greek art. Now, let us use these examples. On your left side, you have an Egyptian statue of a family portrait as a representative of Egyptian art, while on your right side, you have Laocoon and his sons, which is the representative for Greek art. Now, in contrast to the continuity of Egyptian art, Greek art evolved rapidly from stylization down to naturalism. So their concentration is naturalism. The treatment of nature and humanity's place in it, ideal as well as actual, differentiated the Greek canons of proportion from those used by the Egyptians. In Greek art, measurements of the sculpture or the subjects were in relation to human scale and organic form. Now, if you look at the Egyptian sculpture on your left, you would notice that the figures are too stiff and there are less details on the body part. So there is a focus on stylization, unlike the one on your right, wherein you can see the flow of the body towards different directions and the details of the muscles of the subjects. So you can see the focus on the natural form of the human body. Let us start with the very first example of Greek period art, and that is the Kirch vase paintings. Now, Kirch vases are red-figured pottery, wherein a large quantity of them were found at Kerch on the Black Sea coast of Crimea. Now, this is your example of a Kirch vase pottery. Now, Kirch vases are red figure pottery. So when you say red figure pottery, red figures are drawn on a black background. So going back to the example given on the upper portion, as you can see, red tinted figures are drawn onto this black background. Now, there are different types of Kirch vases. The first one, you have your hydria, which is a water container. The second type, you have your lekithos, which is a flask for storing and pouring oil. The third example, you have your krater, which is a bowl for mixing wine and water. Now, Kirch vases can either be red-figured pottery or black-figured pottery. This picture, as you can see, that is your example of a black-figured pottery, meaning black figures are drawn onto a red background. Okay, the next example, or the next type rather, of a Kirch vase, you have your amphora, which is a vessel for storing honey, olive oil, water, and etc. The fifth one, you have your kylix, which is a drinking cup. And the last type, you have oiniko, which is a jug for pouring wine. Now, when it comes to Greek architecture, our example is the Parthenon. Now, please look first at the picture to see what the Parthenon might have looked before it was destroyed. Now, the Parthenon is a former temple on the Athenian Acropolis of Greece. It was dedicated to the goddess Athena, whom the people of Athens consider their patron. Now, construction began in 447 BC when the Athenian Empire was at its peak of power. It was completed in 438 BC, although the decoration of the building continued until 432 BC. Now, the origin of the Parthenon's name is from the Greek word Parthenon, which referred to the unmarried women's apartments in a house, and in the Parthenon's case seems to have been used at first only for a particular room of the temple. It is debated which room this is and how the room acquired its name. The priestesses in the temple are unmarried women, hence the name unmarried women's apartments for the Parthenon. When it comes to Greek sculpture, we have the Elgin marbles. The Elgin marbles, also known as the Parthenon marbles, are a collection of classical Greek marble sculptures made under the supervision of the architect and sculptor Phidias and his assistants. These marble statues or marble sculptures were originally part of the Temple of the Parthenon and other buildings on the Acropolis of Athens. These marbles are currently housed in the British Museum. And when it comes to Greek literature, we have the famous Homer. The Greek writer Homer wrote two of the most famous classic literature pieces of all time. The first one, you have Iliad. Iliad basically narrates the battle between King Agamemnon versus Achilles during the Trojan War. And the second literary piece he wrote is Odyssey, which is a sequel of Iliad. It basically narrates the journey of Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, as he goes home after the Trojan War. The fourth period in Western art, we have medieval art. Medieval art concentrates on Byzantine art from circa 330 to circa 450. Byzantine art developed when Constantine the Great transferred or relocated the capital of the Roman Empire to the Greek city of Byzantium in AD 330. Byzantium later became known as Constantinople. Now, the city of Constantinople is currently the city of Istanbul in Turkey.